Welcome back, coin lovers and history seekers. Today's journey takes us back to a time when even a single penny carried the weight of a changing nation. The 1973 Lincoln 1 cent may look simple, but it belongs to a crucial moment in American history. This was not just a coin, it was a silent witness to economic tension, rising metal prices, and the final years of traditional copper coinage. In 1973, no one imagined that such an ordinary-looking penny would one day be discussed as a symbol of transition. People spent it without thinking, dropped it on sidewalks, or tossed it into jars. Yet history was quietly shaping its future value and importance. Part 2. America in the early 1970s. The early 1970s were a difficult time for the United States. Inflation was rising, oil prices were unstable, and raw materials like copper were becoming more expensive. Every industry felt the pressure, including the U.S. Mint. Producing coins was no longer cheap, and the penny was becoming a financial problem. The 1973 Lincoln cent was struck right in the middle of this economic storm, while the public focused on daily struggles. The government began questioning whether making pennies from copper even made sense anymore. This is where the penny story becomes more than metal. It becomes history. What truly sets the 1973 Lincoln 1 cent apart is its 95% copper composition. This same formula had been used for decades, giving the penny its warm reddish-brown glow. But by 1973, the copper inside the coin was nearing, and sometimes exceeding, its face value. This caused a silent reaction among the public. People began saving copper pennies, believing they might one day become valuable. The 1973 cent became one of the most commonly hoarded pennies of the era, not because it was rare, but because it represented the last of something. The design of the 1973 Lincoln cent was already familiar to Americans. Abraham Lincoln's portrait on the front had been there since 1909, symbolizing unity and leadership. On the reverse, the Lincoln Memorial stood proudly, representing national heritage and remembrance. Because the design didn't change, most people ignored the coin completely. But this familiarity is what makes the 1973 penny powerful. Today, it blends into history so perfectly that its importance went unnoticed at the time. When the 1973 Lincoln 1 cent entered circulation, it didn't arrive quietly. It arrived in huge numbers. The U.S. Mint produced hundreds of millions of these pennies, sending them out across the entire country. Banks received bags full of them. Stores handed them out as change, and people carried them unknowingly in their pockets every single day. This penny became part of everyday American life, blending perfectly into a fast-moving economy where small change was rarely appreciated because of this massive minting. The 1973 penny faced its biggest enemy: heavy circulation. Unlike silver or gold coins that people often saved, pennies were treated roughly. They were dropped on concrete floors, scraped against keys, thrown into drawers, left in cars, and exposed to moisture and dirt. Over time, most 1973 cents lost their original copper shine, becoming dark, scratched, and worn. Only a small fraction escaped this fate. Some were placed into coin rolls straight from the bank. Others were saved by collectors who understood copper's importance. These lucky few avoided circulation and survived in uncirculated condition, retaining their bright, reddish glow, sharp details, and original mint luster. Today, these survivors tell a very different story from their worn counterparts. What makes this even more fascinating is that millions existed, yet very few remain truly pristine. This creates a powerful contrast. High mintage does not always mean high survival in top condition. For collectors, this is where the true challenge lies. Not in finding a 1973 penny, but in finding one that looks as fresh as the day it was minted. In the modern collector market, these well-preserved examples stand out. They are examined carefully for strike quality, surface marks, and copper color. A single tiny scratch can reduce desirability. This harsh reality makes surviving uncirculated 1973 Lincoln cents far more special than people realize. This part of the story proves an important lesson in numismatics. Time is the real judge. The 1973 Lincoln cent was on day rare when it was born, but survival turned it into something worth searching for. It is not just a coin anymore. It is a survivor of everyday use, carrying the marks of history, or in rare cases escaping them entirely. By the time the 1973 Lincoln 1 cent was moving through American pockets, a major decision was slowly forming behind the scenes. The U.S. Mint was under growing pressure, not from collectors or the public, but from economics. Copper prices continued to rise, and every penny produced was becoming more expensive than the value printed on it. What once seemed unthinkable was now unavoidable. The traditional copper penny could not last forever. This moment places the 1973 Lincoln cent in a unique historical position. It stands at the edge of change, right before the final decisions were made. The coin still carried the familiar weight and sound of copper, but its future was already uncertain. Government officials, economists, and mint authorities debated alternatives, knowing that changing the penny would mean ending a tradition that had lasted generations. While these discussions happened quietly, the public remained unaware. People kept spending pennies, dropping them into jars, or ignoring them altogether. Yet history was already moving forward. Just a few years later, the composition of the penny would be altered, and the era of everyday copper cents would slowly fade away. The 1973 Lincoln 1 cent, therefore, became part of the last chapter of true copper circulation. It represents the moment just before the shift, the calm before a silent revolution in American coinage. Unlike dramatic changes announced with headlines, this transition happened quietly, almost invisibly, making coins like the 1973 cent far more meaningful in hindsight. Today, collectors look back at this period with appreciation. The 1973 penny is not remembered for rarity or extreme value, but for what it represents. It symbolizes the end of affordability, the impact of rising material costs, and the reality that even the smallest coin is shaped by global economics. This part of the story reminds us that coins are more than metal. They are records of decisions, pressures, and change. The 1973 Lincoln 1 cent did not announce the end of copper, but it stood there, holding the line, as history quietly moved past it. As time moved forward, the 1973 Lincoln 1 cent slowly transitioned from everyday pocket change into a recognized collectible. Not because it became rare overnight, but because collectors began to understand what it represented. Coins are not only collected for scarcity, they are collected for context. And the 1973 penny holds strong historical context as part of the final copper era. Modern collectors judge this coin using three main factors: condition, surface quality, and color. Most surviving 1973 cents show heavy wear-dull surfaces, dark spots, scratches, and weakened details. These circulated examples still exist in huge numbers and remain worth only face value. But once condition improves, the story changes completely. Uncirculated 1973 Lincoln cents, coins that never entered circulation, are where real collector interest begins. As the 1973 Lincoln 1 cent gained attention among collectors, it also became surrounded by rumors, myths, and misunderstandings. This is common with everyday coins that suddenly gain historical importance. Many people believe that every old copper penny is valuable, or that any unusual-looking 1973 cent must be rare. But the truth is more layered and more interesting. One of the biggest myths is that the 1973 penny is rare simply because it is old. In reality, millions were produced, and most survive today in circulated condition. Age alone does not create value. What matters is how the coin was made, how it survived, and whether it shows something truly unusual. This leads us to mint errors. Genuine errors from 1973 do exist, but they are uncommon, not automatic. Off-center strikes, weak strikes, die cracks, and minor planchette issues occasionally appear. However, many coins that people believe are errors are actually just damage after leaving the mints. Scratches, dents, and corrosion often get mistaken for rare mint mistakes, a costly misunderstanding for new collectors. Another myth is that all copper pennies are worth melting value. While copper prices influence interest, melting U.S. cents is illegal, and most circulated examples still trade at face value. The true appeal of the 1973 Lincoln cent is historical, not speculative hype. Social media has added fuel to these myths with exaggerated claims of extreme values. These stories spread fast, but experienced collectors rely on facts, grading standards, and verified sales. The 1973 penny teaches an important lesson. Knowledge protects collectors. In the end, separating fact from fiction makes the coin even more fascinating. The real story of the 1973 Lincoln 1 cent is not built on rumors. It is built on economics, transition, and quiet change. And that truth is far more powerful than any myth. As we reach the end of the story, the 1973 Lincoln 1 cent stands before us, not as spare change, but as a historical marker. It reminds us that the most important changes in history do not always arrive with noise or celebration. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in copper, in pockets, in everyday life. This penny did not announce the end of traditional copper coinage, yet it lived through the moment when that ending became inevitable. The 1973 penny passed through millions of hands while decisions were being made that would permanently change U.S. coinage. It witnessed rising metal prices, economic pressure, and the slow realization that old systems could no longer survive in a modern world. And still, it continued doing what it was made to do: circulate, serve, and be ignored. Today, collectors look at this coin differently. They see more than Lincoln's portrait or the Lincoln Memorial. They see more than Lincoln's portrait or the Lincoln Memorial. They see a symbol of transition, a reminder of how economics shapes even the smallest objects in our lives, whether worth 1 cent or a few dollars. Its true value lies in the story it carries. The 1973 Lincoln 1 cent teaches us an important lesson. History is not always rare, expensive, or dramatic. Sometimes history is common, affordable, and overlooked. And yet, it is just as meaningful. So the next time you see a penny, pause for a moment. Look at it closely, because even the smallest coin can tell a story of change, survival, and the end of an era. Follow 4 more megacoin histories, hidden value, and untold stories from the world of coins.